If you had to crystallize that in just a couple of sentences, what is it about nuclear that makes it so magical? Is it energy density? What is it? The efficiency? What is it?
You're in the right neighborhood. My line on nuclear, if you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. Well, I am anti-blackout. I live in Austin. We got blacked out for 48 hours in 2021. We're seeing more and more blackouts across the country. Why is this happening? Because we're fragilizing the grid with a lot of weather-dependent renewables. So we talk about climate change. Well, let's accept climate change is an issue we have to deal with. Well, then it's a height of foolishness, or the depth of foolishness. I don't know which one it is, to make our most important energy network dependent on the weather.
Right.
We need a weather-resilient electric grid, not a weather-dependent one.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's WolfNYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Robert Bryce, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Happy to be with you, Robert.
It's great to have you. We are here in London for the ARC event, so very cool to do this in person. Just by way of quick introduction, you are an author, podcaster, and documentary film producer. Your podcast is called Power Hungry.
Power Hungry podcast, yep.
You've been the author of 6 books. The latest is A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
And then your documentary is Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. I think you said there's a sequel coming out soon.
That's right. My colleague and I, Tyson Culver is my colleague. He's the director of this next film. It's called Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. It's going to be out in early 2024. It's a 5-part pro-nuclear docuseries that we're releasing on YouTube. So really excited about it. Tyson's done an amazing job in putting it together. We have 35 on-camera interviews with people all over the world, but we talk about how the grid and why the grid has been fragilized, particularly in the United States. We went to Germany, or we went to Japan. We were in the U.S. Filming, and I'm really excited about it. But we end up just pointing out why, if we're serious about having a stable grid, affordable, reliable electricity, and addressing climate change and CO2 emissions, we have to be serious about nuclear. So adamantly pro-nuclear, and unapologetically nuclear. We have to be forward-looking and embracing this technology, because we really, there is no other form of energy that can scale in the ways that we need to scale electricity production globally, and address the CO2 issue without nuclear.
If you had to crystallize that in just a couple of sentences. What is it about nuclear that makes it so magical? Is it energy density? What is it? The efficiency? What is it?
You're in the right neighborhood. My line on nuclear, if you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. Well, I am anti-blackout. I live in Austin. We got blacked out for 48 hours in 2021. We're seeing more and more blackouts across the country. Why is this happening? Because we're fragilizing the grid with a lot of weather-dependent renewables. So we talk about climate change. Well, let's accept climate change is an issue we have to deal with. Well, then it's a height of foolishness, or the depth of foolishness, I don't know which one it is, to make our most important energy network dependent on the weather.
Right.
We need a weather-resilient electric grid, not a weather-dependent one. And yet that is what we're evolving to as we close down our coal-fired power plants and our gas-fired power plants. And this is important to remember, Robert, the amount of money that is now being spent by some of the wealthiest people in the world to force the closure of coal plants and natural gas-fired power plants in the United States is enormous. I wrote about it on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, about Michael Bloomberg announced in September a $500 million grant to a group called Beyond Carbon. And what are their goals? To close all the remaining coal plants in America and close half of the existing gas plants. This is a recipe for disaster. And it's being supported by one of the richest men in the world, who, by the way, flies on private jets and has 12 houses all around the world. So, I mean, one, it's gobsmackingly hypocritical. But secondly, it's just deeply dangerous for our society to undermine our most important energy network in the way that they are planning. And his cohorts, the groups that he's funding, I am a longtime critic of them. Sierra Club, Natural Resource Defense Council, Rocky Mountain Institute will get hundreds of millions of dollars to push this effort. So make no mistake, it is a serious threat. I forgot your question, but I went off on
it at the beginning. Just why nuclear is important, basically, and why it's in a league of its own relative to other energy resources.
So, and you were close on the energy density. So, it's power density. This is the correct term. So, I sound the pedant here, but this is what I do. So energy is the ability to do work. Power is the rate at which work gets done. We don't really care about energy. We don't really care, frankly. I mean, Leo's the sound guy here, whether this electricity that we're using to make this podcast, whether it comes from a coal plant or a hydro plant or a nuclear plant.
So power is energy per unit time.
Exactly. Okay. Very good. Thank you. And it's measured in watts, and energy is measured in joules or BTUs, right? So, and power can be measured in horsepower if we're going to use imperial units. Okay. So power density matters because we want small footprints. And that's why nuclear is the big winner, because it is extraordinarily high power density. Indian Point, a nuclear plant, which is now closed, 2,000 watts per square meter. We're in London. Rolls-Royce is building an SMR, planning an SMR. Their planned footprint will allow a power density of 10,000 watts per square meter. But compare that now to wind energy, 1 watt per square meter. I don't care where you put it. Wow. Onshore, offshore, doesn't matter. It's 1 watt per square meter, period. Elvis, end of story, Elvis has left the building. And
intermittent, or does that?
And intermittent, right? Yeah, and solar is 10 watts per square meter. So a lot better than wind, but still incurably intermittent. Yeah. So the problem is then, and why do these intermittent renewables, intermittent alternative energy sources increase power prices? It's because you have to build a grid that is equal to or equal to the size of all the renewables you're building, because you can't count on them to deliver when the chips are down. And I mentioned Texas, and my joke about that is, okay, so we built 60 billion was spent on wind and solar in Texas in the years before the 2021 blackouts. And when the grid was on the verge of collapse, and it was very close to collapse, all that wind and solar went to Cancun with Ted Cruz. I mean, it's all gone, all gone, left town, wasn't available. So we had to have that much thermal generation because that wind and solar wasn't available. So nuclear is the source that can be available all the time, and at zero carbon. But we have a long way to go, and we can talk about those challenges. But I think the scale of the challenge that we face, both in the United States and around the world, in building the electric infrastructure that we need is, I mean, it's gobsmacking in terms of the scale of what has to happen.
Right. So the power density is important, and then this intermittency factor of renewables puts a lot of slack in the system, which seems maybe
introduces chaos into
and it's
the
especially
system.
Crazy if you are a climate change activist and you think weather's becoming increasingly chaotic.
Right.
that seems pretty ridiculous to try and build your system.
Why make our system dependent on the weather then?
Right.
Okay, I'll grant your point.
Yeah.
Okay, the weather is becoming hotter, colder, more extreme for longer times. Well, then don't make
for sake of argument.
Don't make our system dependent on the weather.
Yes,
we need weather resilient systems, not weather dependent ones.
Yes,
and that is the part that's being lost in a lot of this conversation. And the one thing that I think is just gobsmackingly stupid, and I'm here in Britain, I'm using that same term now, but the amount of money we're spending under the Inflation Reduction Act to encourage the growth of wind and solar.
Oh, wow.
And it doesn't matter where you put it, you still get the subsidy. So we're talking ultimately the spending on these alternative energy schemes are not going to be $369 billion, as President Biden claimed. Instead, it could be on the order of $2.5 trillion. I mean, it is just a staggering sum of money. But if I can, since we're in London, we're at the ARC Forum for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. I gotta talk about my paper.
That was my next question.
Powering the
I do want to say one thing though.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of hypocrisy, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, I know.
How cute is that? You print money to fund an act to reduce inflation.
Right.
I mean, it's as hypocritical as making weather-dependent power grids. Right.
Well, and this is one of the things that concerns me enormously is that, look, I'm all day pro-America, all day bullish on the United States, but the amount of deficit spending the government has been doing. And now this year, we will see our debt service costs exceed $1 trillion in a 12-month period. That's more than we're spending on national defense.
Right.
I mean, what? I mean, why isn't this being discussed? Why isn't this a top priority of deficit reduction? And instead, it gets barely any nod from any politician in Washington. And it's been a bipartisan corruption.
Yeah.
I'm not
the magic of money printing.
Magic of money printing. And this argues for a very, I know you're pro-crypto guy, argues
pro Bitcoin.
Yeah, pro-Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
But that it argues for, well, then you need some alternative system, some alternative currency that's going to hold value, whether it's gold, crypto, commodities. I mean, these are all things that I talk about and think about all the time because I think about it both for my personal money, but also more broadly about, well, what makes sense in a world that's just gone insane with the money printing press?
Yes. I don't want to get too far afield, though. We are at ARC.
Yeah.
You wrote a paper for ARC titled Powering the Unplugged. I think this is about the challenge of bringing energy to developing countries. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure, love to. Well, first, I was flattered to be invited to write the paper, and it builds on some of the work that I wrote, some of the reporting that I did for my sixth book, A Question of Power, and pointing out that the challenge of bringing more electricity to the developing countries is an enormous one. I mean, truly a mind-bending problem of scale. So to give you an idea, roughly there are 1.2, 1.3 billion Africans. On average, when you look at their electricity consumption, it's roughly equal to that of 35 million Canadians. A little bit more, but that's kind of the scale of what we're talking about the how big is this challenge. Another way to think about it, roughly 1 in 10 people in the world today has no access to electricity. 1 in 10.
Wow.
4 in 10, roughly 3.7 billion, live in places where electricity consumption on a per capita basis is less than what's consumed by an average kitchen refrigerator in the U.S. 3.7 billion people in the world today consume or live in places where average electricity consumption is 1,200 kilowatt hours or less per year. So this is the defining inequality, defining disparity in the world today, is this enormous gap between the electricity rich and the electricity poor. And so how do we deal with that? And this is the part. These are the points that I underscore in the paper. And I also underscore one other key point, and then I'll talk about what are the ways that we can address this. So why do we care? Well, we care. If we care about women and girls, we should care a lot, because the great demographer, the late Swedish demographer Hans Rosling said there are about 5 billion people today on the planet who are walking around in clothes that have been washed by hand. Well, if there are 5 billion people walking around in clothes that have been washed by hand, that means there are 2.5 billion. There are 2.5 billion women and girls who are doing that washing. Well, electricity, as I point out in the paper and point out in my book, electricity frees women and girls from the pump, the stove, and the wash tub.
Right.
You give them a washing machine, and it changes their lives.
Yes. This is the essence of economic productivity. Yeah. Right? Freeing people up.
But you need electricity to make that happen. Yes. So what are these barriers then to electrification in developing countries? Well, there are many, but we focus on a few of them. One of them is lending, and this is a real problem. I'm not a partisan. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm disgusted. I'm deeply disgusted, right? President Biden in June went to a meeting or spoke at a dinner sponsored by the League of Conservation Voters, which is a very wealthy climate-focused NGO in Washington. Annual budget of more than $100 million a year, and gleefully announced that the U.S. Export-Import Bank was funding a $900 million solar project in Angola. Angola's CO2 emissions are so small as to be insignificant. And the Export-Import Bank in its press release bragged that this is going to help Angola meet its climate commitments. I mean, a more laughable example of climate colonialism, green colonialism, carbon you cannot find. I mean, it frankly disgusted me, and I wrote about it on my Substack. But it's an example of these lending practices that are paternalistic, are designed to keep the people who are in the dark in the dark. And I find that, we've got to change this mindset that we developed, we in the West, in the US, in the UK, in Europe, we burned coal. We used hydrocarbons, and a lot of them, to industrialize. To say that countries in Africa and South Asia, South America can't do it is just flat wrong. Right. So we have to fix the lending part of it. The other part of it is a difficult one, and maybe the one that's the hardest is dealing with corruption. And the way I summarize it is theft is the enemy of light. If you have people stealing in a society, then it undermines the integrity of the grid. If you're going to have a workable electric grid, you have to have a system in which people pay for the power. You can't just give it away. And if they steal it, well, then ultimately the system degrades. So corruption is one that we have to deal with. And I show in the report a scatter plot that the more corrupt countries have less power, less electricity. The less corrupt countries have more power. It just stands to reason. It's axiomatic. If you have a corrupt country, your power grid is going to be weak. Electric grids are a very good reflection of the societies they power.
I have to jump in on this. Yeah. I've never heard it described like this, theft as the enemy of light. But this beautifully mirrors an economic axiom, actually. Theft reduces productivity.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So every unit of human time that's spent stealing from another human is time spent not producing.
Yeah.
Further, it undermines the incentive to produce at all. Because if I produce something and someone steals it, then why would I produce?
Right.
Right. So I think what you're getting at is maybe the material manifestation of that we see corrupt countries having less energy production.
Oh, yeah.
Less corrupt countries having more energy production, which is almost more energy production is equivalent to more productivity.
And energy is money.
And energy is money.
Right. And energy is the economy. Right. So if you undermine that capacity, well, you undermine the entire economy, right?
Yes.
Just because these things are, Art Berman says, money is a call on energy, and energy in many ways is a call on money, right?
Yes.
So it's like they're interchangeable. And this is the part where, I know you're a Bitcoin guy, that this is where these things kind of collide. But so let me just finish the last point on, why, what are the ways we can address this enormous disparity in electricity availability. So talked about lending, talked about corruption. One of the ways forward then, given those two factors, is to embrace microgrids. Now, this isn't a perfect solution. Since the days of Edison and Insull, grids, the larger, generally it's been axiomatic, the larger the grid, the more productive and more efficient it is because of thermodynamic efficiency of the power plant, right? Generally, the bigger the power plant, the better enthalpic efficient, I think that's the right word, the better efficiency you get out of the system, right? But if you have a country that's corrupt and you can't get a lot of capital, well, then shrink the grid until you can create a grid that has integrity. And that's the key, right? The grids have to shrink until you can assure the integrity of that grid. And if you ensure the integrity of the grid and it pays for itself, you can create another grid, right? But that making smaller grids is a way forward. And this is when I cite some work that had been done in Nigeria, a country that's notoriously corrupt, has a notoriously bad grid. And a lot of researchers are saying, well, they start with microgrids. Let's start with, instead of trying to electrify the whole country at once, let's start with this neighborhood. And then we'll try to expand it into the village, right? And we'll grow it and with by chunks, right? And build it instead of trying to build a top-down grid all at once. Let's build a smaller grid and build it up from there.
Bottom up, decentralized.
Yeah, and there are problems with this, and I've seen them myself. And in Lebanon and Beirut, where you have microgrids run by the generator mafia. Well, they operate these small generators or smaller generators at 2, 3, 4, 5 megawatts. But the air pollution they create is enormous, right? So that's a problem, right?
Right.
But that's one of the trade-offs. But the advantages are you have less capital deployed. So the risks to the lender are not as great. You have then a smaller affinity group where they're going to know if somebody's stealing power, right? And this is what the generator mafia in Lebanon, these guys know who their customers are. And they know who's not paying their bill. And if you don't pay your bill, you get hurt, you get cut off, or you might get hurt, right? And so the systems have to have integrity. The system of the grid itself has to have what I call esprit de grid. It has to have some cohesion, but you need civil society for that. And this is one of the points I make in kind of the opening address by Jordan Peterson had this kind of call to hope, right? Call to think about what are we striving toward? What are we trying to get done here? Well, we have to dream big, right? We have to think about these problems and try to address them. So that was the effort that I made in this paper, which I'm very proud of. I excerpted parts of it on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. And we'll excerpt another one in the next couple of days too, because I want to get these ideas out because I'm passionate about them.
Yeah, it's extremely important. If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone, a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touch screen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility, and it's really a brand new UI UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet. And I have to go back to this one more time.
Yeah,
theft is the enemy of light. I'm going to use that.
It's yours with my compliments. Amateurs borrow, professionals steal. So steal away.
You cannot steal that which is not scarce, and ideas are non-scarce. So thank you for sharing.
Like that. Well, the stealing line is variously attributed to Picasso and John Lennon. So just that amateurs borrow.
Wonderful. I have to dig into one more thing about that. So without getting into the argument of whether it is or not, I argue strongly on the show that inflation is theft. Right? Oh, yeah. It's a form of implicit taxation. Right. Taxation is non-consensual exchange. Inflation is theft. You said theft is the enemy of light. So the extent to which we are printing money and debasing the currency, stealing purchasing power from savers, do you think this is a direct contributor to, I don't know, the fragilization of our power grid, the decrease in our ability to have power output per unit capita?
This is a really interesting question, and one that I've been thinking about in my own head for a long time, because we are printing all of this money. We are creating this increasing debt that then has to be paid back. And yet the counter indicators are that the economy still seems to be doing well. And And now, is it doing well for everyone? I would argue no,
right.
But particularly when it comes to real estate and housing, right? Because it's pricing out a whole cadre of, people who can't afford that nut, can't afford the mortgage.
Middle class is getting wiped out.
Middle class is getting slammed, and the poor getting double slammed. And California is a perfect example of this, right? A state that where my daughter lives, but has the highest poverty rate in America. You know what the electricity prices average? Bureau of Labor Statistics, latest data, in San Diego, average residential price of electricity in San Diego is 47.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It's almost 3 times the national average.
3 times national. Wow.
In San Francisco, it's exactly twice the national average. In Los Angeles, it's about 40% higher. So in the biggest communities in California, they're just squeezing the poor and the middle class.
Right.
So the inflation it's one that I wish I knew my economics better, but I mean, it's made me think, again, on my own terms, well, what's the way forward then? Where does a smart guy put his money, right? Is it Bitcoin? Is it gold? I ask people this all the time. If I gave you $10,000 and you're my fiduciary in 10 years, I said, I want the best return on that 10 grand. Where would you put it? Now, I'm assuming your answer is going to be Bitcoin. But I've heard
for me personally, it's not prescriptive though.
Yeah,
I'm not
of course.
saying now if you ask me as a fiduciary, I could give you advice.
Yeah.
But
right.
Typically, we don't like to give financial advice.
No, of course. Right. But I understand that argument. I respect it. But I ask it of other people because it tells you what their worldview is,
Sure.
right? So I've had people say physical gold,
Right.
and people with very smart, have a lot of money, physical gold, because I don't trust the system.
Right.
We're going to get screwed. Others are saying, U.S. equities. I'm long U.S. equities myself, right? It's because I can understand that, right?
Yeah.
But I think this is one of the most important questions of our time. Right?
Yeah.
How do we assure that the poor and the middle class don't get screwed by all these inflationary pressures in the marketplace?
Right.
But does that mean commodities like oil and gas? Maybe. Does it mean base metals? There's an argument for that. But the price of copper this year has been down or flat.
Yeah.
Despite claims that, we're going to need a lot more copper. So it's a confusing time, Robert. And that's why I think it's just, I love talking about it, because who knows? Who are the smart people, right? Who knows anything? I don't know.
That's why we have decentralized media, so we can all talk about it and figure it out. Let's go back into your past a little bit.
Sure.
What you see, obviously, you're very knowledgeable about energy. Seems to be a passion of yours. What was it that initially drew you into this space? What was it that fascinated you about energy, electricity specifically?
Sure.
And what was your, journey from there until now?
As you asked that question, I've answered this various ways in the past, but I remember when I was a kid, it just popped in my head when I was probably 8 or 9. I got a toy car that was given to me. It was a really cool one, and I took it apart because I wanted to see what the motors were. I wanted to see how the little electric motors worked. And my brother was aghast. He was like, "What are you doing? What are you taking? It was a cool car." I said, "Well, I wanted to see the motors. And I had to attach them to a battery. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time. But I've always been fascinated with electricity as a thing, right? The thingness of what it is, right? So from the days when I was a kid, I grew up in Tulsa. It's my hometown. And so my dad wasn't in the energy business. He was in the insurance business. But I grew up around people who were in the energy sector and were doing interesting things, working all around the world. And, I was hunted when I was a kid. So I'd hunt in the oil field. I knew what pump jacks were. I knew what this thing was, right? So, but as further I got in my career in journalism, I realized energy is the most important business in the world. It's the sector upon which every other business depends. It's the world's biggest, most important industry, and also the one that encompasses nearly every kind of technology. So I count myself incredibly fortunate, right? This is my purpose and my passion. This is what I do. This is what I'm born to do, and this is what I'm going to continue doing until they, take the big dirt nap, right? So I don't have another aspiration but to do this. And how do we bring more power to more people? What is that? And how do we assure cheap, abundant, reliable energy and power for everyone? That's the challenge of our time. Because if we can do that, then people can make money, right? If we can do that, women and girls are freed from the pump, the stove, and the wash tub. If we can do that, then we can have a prosperous society in which we have, stable systems. But if we don't have that, social unrest, chaos ensues in a very short time.
If I could ask you a philosophical question.
Sure.
Because I like the word power. It's very interesting. As we said earlier, energy per unit time. But it also has this ambivalent feature, sort of, where we often talk about power as in the political sense.
It's a multifaceted word.
Authority, the ability to be someone else's boss or have influence over them, etc. Then there's power more in the physics sense, energy per unit time. What is the relationship between these two things? Between let's call it political power and physical power. What is the connection between these two things?
That's another good question. I guess it's this. My first thought is it's something about the ability to move, right? That you've got to have some influence. It's that the word power to me in my mind's eye suggests that something is moving somewhere, right? So, political sense, power. You're moving an audience. You're moving a system. You're moving a policy. You're imposing something. And that's what the grid is, right? It's this constant movement of electrons, right? Back and forth. It's 60 cycles per second, or here, and I guess 50 cycles in the UK, right? But it's an interesting idea. I have to tease on that, or to think on that a little bit more about what those relationships are. But the idea of power and the ideas around energy are incredibly complicated. I was just quoting Richard Feynman. In fact, he says energy is a very subtle thing. I think that's the way he put it. He said it's something that's very hard to understand. And I think that's one reason why there's so much demagoguery around it, because the general public doesn't understand it.
It's the same with money, right?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Hard to understand, easy to obfuscate further. Easy
to obfuscate, and also easy to just ramble on and blather about it without any kind of real deep understanding. And the level of ignorance on the topics of energy and power are just enormous, and it's a big challenge. And so, I see it as one of my obligations to try and do that education, and even in front of energy audiences. And I do a lot of public speaking. I'll ask energy audiences, tell me, the difference between energy and power, right? And even in rooms of engineers, they don't know. Or ask about units of energy, right? Like exajoules, right? The Statistical Review of World Energy publishes now data in exajoules. And I've been in audiences full of energy. I was in Phoenix, 900 in the audience, 900 people in the audience. All of them worked in the energy business. Raise your hand if you know what an exajoule is. Like, 2 hands. And I wag my finger at him and I say, you need to know what this is. Like, this is a unit of energy, right? Like it's equal to a quad. It's equal to the amount of energy in 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. If you're going to be in the energy business, you need to know these units, right? You need to learn. And then I give them the exeget. I give them a little lecture and a little more finger wagging, and I move on.
Okay, so I think you said the 9-year-old boy breaking down the motor engines, right? Dissecting them. You said you were fascinated by what electricity is. So I would like to ask you, what is electricity? And then why is it the world's most important and fastest growing form of energy?
Sure. Well, okay, so let's start with what it is, the thingness of the thing, right? Electricity moves. This is an interesting fact I didn't really know. It doesn't move as fast as the speed of light. It actually moves slower than the speed of light.
I did not know that.
So there's resistance in the copper wire or the aluminum wire when you move it. So it can't travel as fast as the speed of light. It's somewhat less. Exactly how much less, I could look it up. I'd have to, but I don't remember that. But it is a flow of energy, right? And that's what power is. Energy is the ability to do work. Power is the rate at which work gets done. Energy is worthless unless you can make it flow. And the more you can make it flow, the more power you have. So I have 10 barrels of oil in the ground. Okay, well, it's worth nothing unless I can make it come to the surface. So an oil well that produces 100 barrels of oil per day, that's a power term. It's 10 times more powerful than a well that produces 10 barrels per day, right? So that's a power metric. So electricity is that ability to turn that energy into power. And for me to tell you what it is, I don't know that I can. It's Feynman described it. He said electricity says, well, one thing moves over here, and so then it makes something move over here, which I thought was kind of I know it's like, but to hear that said is like, well, Yeah.
So it's a correspondence of some kind.
Right. But it's the flow. Well, I guess if we're going to talk about AC current, it's this flow of energy back and forth at 60 cycles per second that allows you to do end work at one location that's apart from the generation station.
And these are electrons that are moving?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So flow of electrons
at a very high speed over conducting wire.
Right. So convert energy from one location into work at another location.
That would be a very good way to think about it. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And why is it the most important? Let's talk about that. Yeah. Why is it the most important form of energy? Because it's the form of energy that we crave over every other. The age of electricity fundamentally changed humanity. I mean, like no other form of energy ever has. Right. So you can look at the scale of what, GDP, right? So yes, the industrial age, that GDP starts to go up. But then the electric age was built on the tools of the industrial age, right? Edison used coal-fired steam engines, right? And we're still using effectively the same kind today, right? Still using steam-fired generators running on coal for 37% of global electricity. So that electrification just fundamentally changed not just society, but it changed how we live and where we live. So electricity, as I write about in my book, I talk about in our first documentary, Juice: How Electricity Explains the World, fundamentally changed the city because Frank Sprague, one of the great American inventors, unknown American inventors, invented, perfected, and commercialized the electric streetcar and then the electric elevator. Well, that fundamentally changed our cities, how high we could build buildings, how far we could move along the horizon in the city in a pollution-free way, right? So it is the most important form of energy because it allows us incredible leverage in the physical environment, right? And that's what we want. We want that ability to do work, and electricity gives us incredible ability to do work of all kinds.
And then all these digital technologies too. It's just occurring to me that obviously they're all electrified. And they're wildly powerful productivity boosters.
Oh my gosh.
Right? The fact that we're all so much more interconnected than we've ever been.
I mean, you're typing on your laptop just kind of, not absent-mindedly, but as a given. Well, but that laptop when I was a kid, that didn't exist, right? There was nothing like that. And the amount now that everyone, I remember the first video camera I ever saw, right? And I thought, well, this is cool. I was in high school. I thought, man, this is amazing, right? But it had this big suitcase-like thing that came with it, and now everyone has a video camera, right? Everywhere. And everyone can publish everywhere, right? Where it used to be the publishing was only available to a few elite, very centralized corporations. So fundamentally changed society, in many ways leveled out, decentralized everything. So it's the most important as well because we talked about women and girls. It's the most important because, as I said, it's the form we crave over every other. And the economies that have cheap, abundant, reliable electricity are the ones that flourish and the ones that don't decay.
Right.
So that's why it's the most important. Fastest growing? Well, because that's what it is, right? Because everyone wants more, right? We're not designed to use less. And so you see in Asia, in China, I wrote about this a while back, but for several years in a row, China was adding roughly 1 France per year of new electricity generation.
Wow.
And now I think globally we're adding about 1 Brazil's worth of new electricity demand every year. So in Vietnam, Pakistan, India, China, you name it, Indonesia, these countries are doing whatever they can. I call it the iron law of electricity. These countries, businesses, people will do whatever they have to do to get the electricity they need, including burning coal. So, this is the most important and fastest growing form of energy in the world. And there are efforts to stop it and prohibit or slow the growth of coal, for instance, slow the growth of hydrocarbons. They really aren't having much effect. And you see now, especially now in Germany, what are they doing? They're reopening their coal plants. Hello. What does that
they are reopening them.
Oh, yeah.
And they closed down their nuclear, though, right?
Yes, which is beyond insane.
Other thing electricity has given us, thank you, electricity, is Bitcoin. Money that cannot be counterfeited. So just like to add that one in, it is this layered, civilizations like this layered stack of technologies, right? Yeah. We get steam, then we have electricity, now we have digital tools. So all these things that are unlocking human productivity.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world. My thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is much more clear. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from 1,473 human trials conducted over a period of 32 years. So if you're looking to start enhancing your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
Insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. There's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. And I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. With Wasabi Wallet, you can receive, send, and store Bitcoin privately. In Wasabi Wallet, your transaction history and wallet balance are completely hidden. Wasabi Wallet is easy to use, all of its privacy features are built in by default, and it works with any amount of Bitcoin. Wasabi users can make CoinJoin transactions together with BTC Pay server users or Trezor Suite users. For BTC Pay server users, they can make payments directly inside of a CoinJoin, and for Trezor Suite users, you can make CoinJoins directly on a hardware wallet. These features result in fee savings and security improvements for both sets of users. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download the state-of-the-art Bitcoin privacy wallet.
You say that hydrocarbons are here to stay.
They are.
I think this flies in the face of a lot of environmentalist perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, the shortest answer is because they provide us with the energy, the amount of energy that we need at prices that we can afford. Mm-hmm. That's really
so this is power density again?
Energy density.
Energy density here.
Right. So power density is a measure of energy flow. Energy density I can explain by, so I'm holding a glass of water here. Well, so imagine if I went outside and I found a bunch of sawdust or twigs and filled it with put it in this cup, this glass. Well, the energy density of that would be far less than if I went out to the generator out here and filled it with diesel fuel or gasoline.
Right.
The energy density in this cup would be massively greater with that gasoline or diesel fuel than it would be with the twigs or the straw or the sawdust.
Energy density is a characteristic of the raw material.
Generally, the energy density generally refers to a volume or a mass of stuff and how much energy is contained in it.
Right.
Power density is a measure of the energy flow,
the process of
that
production,
could be harnessed from a given area, volume, or mass.
Got it. Okay.
So one is a measure of what's contained in it. The other is a measure of the flow from it.
Stock versus flow.
Right. Yeah.
Got it.
So an important distinction, and it's not an essential to be made because, again, people in the industry confuse them all the time. Mm-hmm. They don't know the difference, and that's one of the reasons why I'm sure I have a job for a long time to come. But back to Bitcoin, which I'm fascinated by and been familiar with for a long time, but I haven't jumped in because I still have this idea that government could come in at any time just to reveal my thinking on it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that fascinates me, and we talked about this before we started recording, was that it is embodied energy, right? Mm-hmm. It is this, well, it's actually not embodied because it's out there somewhere in the cloud, right? It's out distributed, but it is the notion that energy is money, right? Yes. And that you have to have energy, and if you have energy, you can make money.
Yes.
And that to me really is revealing about, again, the things we've been talking about, why electricity is so important, because you're taking our very highly ordered energy, which is electricity, right? Very neatly stacked electrons that are very neatly delivered and in a very cohesive package, and then you're turning it into something that has tradable value.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the concept of it just is interesting, and it builds on this idea about the importance of energy and power, because now you're actually turning it into something that is what we call money, right?
Yes.
But you could use that same say quantity of energy, whether it would be gasoline or diesel fuel or whatever, to turn and then refine copper ore, right, and turn it into something that would then be tradable.
Yes.
But it's the similar kind. You need electricity for both.
That's right.
Right. So you need electricity to refine oil and gas, right?
Yes.
So these are all kind of, in some ways, of a piece in my mind about what those end products are and the importance of the energy and power to produce the refined products at the end game that we can then buy, sell, trade, collect, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, there's examples of, I think, Iceland, right? They have stranded energy sources. They would convert that into aluminum bauxite, perhaps, and then they export it. So it's kind of a way of exporting energy. But with Bitcoin, it's interesting. And it's been called digital energy or digitized energy.
Yeah.
That you're converting these stranded, really any energy source, but any stranded energy source in particular, into a digital commodity.
Yeah.
So you're turning the value of this energy into something that's as portable as information itself.
Right.
And then sellable on a global market 24/7. The other interesting connection between them, I think, is the second law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Now, Bitcoin can be destroyed technically and can be sent to a burner address, but it cannot be created. So it's something, if money and energy are the same thing, or at least corresponding, the money supply of Bitcoin maps perfectly onto energy, right? Energy is this thing that we can only transform or harness, but we can't actually create more of it according to thermodynamics. I know it's a little confusing because when you say power generation, we're harnessing more power, but you're not actually creating it, right? It's being harnessed from something.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin seems like an ideal medium for actually transacting and probably pricing energy as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, so let me put that question to you then, because isn't this ultimately, though, because my concern, and I've heard the pros, I've heard the cons. My son Michael is an avid crypto guy. He's all in on Ethereum. Started mining it when he was 14 in our house, and so I'm well familiar with the history. I've been in crypto mining halls in Iceland. I've seen them myself, right? You know, where they're using natural airflow for cooling. So I'm fascinated by it, but couldn't the U.S. government, for one, then if Bitcoin gets too high and says, just step in and say, y'all are out of business. You can't. And they've taken some moves that are in the regulatory realm that are showing that they are willing to crack down. But isn't that ultimately the biggest danger for Bitcoiners, that the government steps in and says, cute little shop you have here, too bad you're out of business, because our fiat business, we like our fiat business.
Yeah, so two things I would say about this.
Sure.
This is a sticking point for many people that are going down the rabbit hole. It's like, well, if it is that disruptive, government will never allow it.
Yeah.
First thing I would say is the analogous question to ask yourself is, how do you turn off the internet everywhere forever?
Yeah.
Because that's what would be required to actually stop Bitcoin. It doesn't actually even stop Bitcoin at that point. You would actually need to turn off the electricity grid everywhere forever, plus the internet everywhere forever, and that would sort of stop Bitcoin.
Yeah, it'd be kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, we'd be back in the Stone Ages, right? So in that sort of long tail event, you're like, well, I guess the Bitcoin I had was kind of the least of my concerns at this point. The second thing I would say is that this has happened already, actually. The CCP in China has outlawed Bitcoin and, de-outlawed it and re-outlawed it multiple times. Most recently, they banned Bitcoin mining, which is the physical footprint of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
At the time that China banned it, this is, I think, roughly 18 months ago, 50% of global hash rate was coming out of China. 18 months later, the ban is still in place. Still, 25% of Bitcoin's global hash rate is coming out of China. Now, if the
how do you track that? I'm just curious.
It's tracked through mining tools online. I don't have the technical specifics on this. I'm relying on some research secondhand.
No problem.
Please check my numbers.
No, I don't doubt you. I'm just, to me, it's
no. Definitely needs to be checked, because I am stating this secondhand. So my position on there would be, if the CCP is the most brutal, iron-fisted authoritarian regime that humanity's ever seen, and they can't stop Bitcoin, then which government
North Korea
can?
might be in the running for that title.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, so this is the $100 trillion plus question. How do you stop Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And this is where...
and your answer is it can't be.
Well, we don't know how. I don't have a good answer to it.
Yeah.
So that makes you bullish. And many people have thought about this thing. You know, Bitcoiners are famous for being adversarial thinkers, trying to think through the game theory of how you turn this thing off.
Right.
And Bitcoin's sort of optimized to not be turned off.
Right.
So that is the big question. It's how do you stop it?
Yeah.
No one has a good answer, including me. So sorry I don't have a good answer.
No, that's fine. You know, I kind of, it's my job. I can ask the question. People don't have to answer it. Right?
Yeah,
you know,
that's the best answer I have to date, and which actually increases my conviction. Right?
Yeah, fair enough.
No one can figure out how to turn it off. Well, that seems like a good asset to invest in. Let me ask you this question: the energy / geopolitical world changed after October 7th, 2023.
Right.
As you were saying to me offline.
Yeah.
What was the catalyzing event?
Sure.
And what have been the changes since that event?
Yeah. So I've been watching the energy markets for a while, and I don't claim to have extra, special geopolitical strategy knowledge, but I can follow pricing. And what happened on October 6th, when you look at natural gas prices at the TTF trading hub in Holland, which is the benchmark price for natural gas in Europe. They were about $38 per million BTUs. Today, it's over $50. Well, what happened? Well, the Hamas, the brutal terror attack, and in Israel, in what was now, I think, the second October war, right, following 50 years to the day of the beginning of the Yom Kippur War, which led to the OPEC oil embargo and had repercussions for the next 50 years. Is this going to have the same effect? Well, I can't predict that. But what I do know is that we're already seeing Israeli gas that was coming from the offshore fields, and the Tamar field has already been shut down, which was a huge gas field offshore Israel. The Israelis were shipping gas to the Egyptians. The Egyptians were liquefying it and turning it into LNG and sending it to Europe. So that Israeli gas is off the market. And if this conflict continues, more Israeli gas may go off the market. That's going to hurt Egypt. It's going to hurt Jordan. It's going to hurt Europe. It's going to hurt Israel, of course. So the energy geopolitics now are much more, I would say, more precarious. But I think it also underscores the importance, yet again, of hydrocarbons in the United States and in Australia and in Canada, because Russian gas is now off the table for Europe. This Hamas war now clearly benefits Russia, clearly benefits China. China has been the biggest buyer of Iranian oil over the last couple of years, and the Iranians are using that oil wealth to fund both Hamas and Hezbollah. So we're seeing now a more polar world, and with energy being a key part of it, with Russia, China, and Iran on one side, and then you have the Saudis, the Qataris, the Iraqis all declaring solidarity with the Palestinians. Well, this has shuffled the deck in a big way. So the world looks a lot different now than it did before October 7th. And I don't think we've begun yet to quite understand all of the energy implications of what this might be. So I'm just trying to tease out some of these issues and think about them and start talking about them, because they're incredibly important. Because Israel 50 years ago was not a big oil and gas producer. Well, now it's a major gas producer. 50 years ago, the U.S. was more dependent on OPEC oil. Today, we're not as dependent on OPEC oil. We're an significant oil and natural gas exporter, but we're still interdependent in the global marketplace. So how does all this play out? I'm bad at predicting, but we're already seeing the price repercussions, and it's bad news for Europe all around.
You said we should shift our thinking because energy independence is a term often used. We should sort of shift our thinking towards energy interdependence, right?
Right.
What is that? This conflict that you're describing and the unpredictability that it presents us, is that a collapse in energy interdependence because less trade is occurring in the global marketplace?
No, I don't think we're going to see necessarily a big decline in the trade in global market because the U.S. exports a lot of light sweet crude and we import heavy sour. That's how our refineries are set up. They make their money. Their crack spread is the term of art by buying lower cost, heavier sour crude and then refining it. And we export a lot of light sweet crude, particularly from shale, to refineries overseas because that is a better match for their refining setups. So that's a change, right? It doesn't mean we're energy independent because we're exporting oil. We're still interdependent.
Gotcha.
The same with natural gas. We're now exporting 20 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas. We're now the world's biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas. 20 years ago, we were facing the prospect of being the world's largest importer of liquefied natural gas. So technology changes things, right? And it can change them in a relatively quick, relatively short amount of time. So this war just shuffles the geopolitics yet again. And I think it shows yet again the importance of having domestic hydrocarbon production. And I think it also shows that we need to be more clear-eyed about this issue of domestic hydrocarbons and the Canadian hydrocarbons in Australia, who are our allies, who are unshakable allies, who are producing a lot of hydrocarbons. Those are the ones, right? So we need, we got to be clear about this, right? We live in a dangerous world, and this has just shown yet again how dangerous it can be.
What is it about? What's fragilizing the global power grid? We talked earlier about inflation, theft is the enemy of light. Like perhaps that's contributing. I'm not. Maybe the ideology behind renewables is contributing to this to some extent. Maybe ESG. Why is the global power grid becoming more fragilized? And then what is the proper role of nuclear power in that context?
Sure. Well, I'm adamantly pro-nuclear. As I said, I'm anti-nuclear. And if you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. Well, I'm anti-blackout. There's only one way forward if we're going to be serious about reducing CO2 emissions, and that's with nuclear power. You asked about the global grid. We don't have a global grid. We have a lot of regional grids, right? We have a lot of small grids, right? The U.S. grid is not connected with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. I live in Texas. We're largely independent of the Eastern Interconnect and Western Interconnect. We're connected a little bit, but only a little bit. So most of Texas is within the ERCOT RTO, and so we're kind of an island. But in Texas, our grid has been fragilized. We're added a lot of weather-dependent renewables, right? So it's not as stable as it used to be. It's not as reliable. We had this summer, number of days where the RTO was saying, "Hey, we're just barely scraping by." Well, what was happening? Wind energy was not available on some of the hottest days. It went away. So the thermal generators had to step in. But we've seen similar situations both here in Europe and causing big spikes in power prices where, you've had extended wind droughts, and that's the right term, wind droughts. In Germany, well, if the wind doesn't blow, you build all these wind turbines. That's great, but if the wind doesn't blow, you're screwed.
Right.
And the North American Electric Reliability Corporation has repeatedly warned about this issue of extended wind and solar droughts. So we're making the system, the network that we depend on, the electric grid, more vulnerable because we are reducing the baseload power plants we need to assure reliable, affordable, resilient electricity. So it's not just in the U.S. It's happened in Europe. We've seen it happen in other countries. And I was in Japan earlier this year. What is Japan doing? Well, for all of the talk about the Kyoto Protocol and climate change, the Japanese are building coal-fired power plants today. TEPCO, the company that owns Fukushima Daiichi, is finishing an ultra supercritical coal plant on Tokyo Bay. They're also building gas-fired power plants. They're also turning on their nuclear plants. But Japan is the Japanese are very practical, right? But in talking with government officials, their industry officials, I say, well, tell me about climate change and what you're doing. Yeah, well, energy security is our first concern.
Right.
And this was after Russia invaded Ukraine. And that's even more important now after Hamas attacked Israel.
So the fragility of these power grids the extent to which they're becoming fragilized is the same extent to which they're adding renewables as their primary energy source.
Well, adding renewables and retiring thermal plants.
Right.
They're retiring their coal-fired power plants and
hydrocarbons would be a firm foundation for power production.
Yeah.
Renewables, are they just functional as supplemental? Is that the right way to think about it?
They're great when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing.
Right, but don't depend on them.
But you can't depend on them.
Okay.
So you have to have, if you have 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt of renewables, you need 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt of dispatchable capacity. It's axiomatic.
Yeah. Right.
It's why the prices go up when you add all these renewables. They don't go down.
Right.
So California is the perfect example. And, you know, since 2008, when Arnold Schwarzenegger mandated renewables in California, the price of electricity on a residential basis in California has gone up 3 times faster than the rest of the U.S. This isn't coincidence, Robert.
Amazing stuff. We need more people to understand the basics of energy and power so we can get a little bit smarter.
Amen, brother.
In our economic policies. Robert, I think I've kept you long enough.
Okay.
We should get back to the event.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been great. Been flattered to talk about this. As you know, it's my purpose and my passion. This is what I do. So I'm always happy to talk about it. And, you know, the ideas around money, energy, power, these are the most important questions of our time.
Yes. You mentioned your Substack. Where else can people find you on the internet?
I'm easy to find on the Google. I'm on TikTok at Power Hungry, PWR Hungry. I'm on Twitter, PWR Hungry. I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. I'm writing almost exclusively for Substack now because I love that platform. Very cool. It's free. But also check out my film, Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. And I have this new documentary coming out that I'll be pushing out more, and I'll keep you posted on that one when we're ready to release that one. But it's called Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid, 5-part pro-nuclear docuseries.
Awesome. Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, my friend.